Chapter 2: The Youngest Printer in America. At length Josiah Franklin determined to place his 12-year-old son in the printing trade. Young Ben was to be apprenticed to an older half-brother, James Franklin. In 1717, my brother James returned from England with a press and letters to set up his business in Boston. I liked it much better than that of my father, but still had a hankering for the sea. To prevent the apprehended effect of such an inclination, my father was impatient to have me bound to my brother. I stood out some time, but at last was persuaded, and signed the indentures when I was yet but 12 years old. I was to serve as an apprentice till I was 21 years of age, only I was to be allowed journeyman's wages during the last year. In a little time I made great proficiency in the business, and became a useful hand to my brother. The terms of his apprenticeship, if typical of the times, make it clear why he considered himself bound to his half-brother. He was probably forbidden to buy or sell anything without the approval of his master, and he was not allowed to drink, gamble, or get married. But there were also a few fringe benefits. His frequent contacts with booksellers and other tradesmen greatly increased his access to books, and he pursued his wide-ranging studies more ardently than ever before. He even fixed his own meal so that he could read at the shop while his fellow workers took time out for lunch at their boarding house. Young Franklin also spent time polishing his writing skills while serving his apprenticeship. Through constant practice and by imitating the style of The Spectator, a satirical London paper he had come across during his early teens, he developed a power of expression which later made him one of the most influential men in America. In old age, he reflected, "Prose writing has been of great use to me in the course of my life, and was the principal means of my advancement." James Franklin unwittingly provided an outlet for his younger brother's pen by establishing, in 1721, the New England Courant, the fourth newspaper to be published in the American colonies. Benjamin described how he became a contributor at the age of 16. He, James, had some ingenious men among his friends who amused themselves by writing little pieces for this paper, which gained it credit and made it more in demand, and these gentlemen often visited us. Hearing their conversations and their accounts of the approbation their papers were received with, I was excited to try my hand among them. But being still a boy, and suspecting that my brother would object to printing anything of mine in his paper if he knew it to be mine, I contrived to disguise my hand, and, writing an anonymous paper, I put it in at night under the door of the printing house. Thus was created Silence Dogood, a fictional widow who shared with the editor of the Courant her humorous and sometimes profound observations on the fashions and foibles of colonial life. Ben secretly wrote these letters every 2 weeks for a period of 7 months. When James and his writing friends occasionally gathered in the shop to try to guess Mrs. Dogood's true identity, the teenaged author was delighted to find that none were named but men of some character among us for learning and ingenuity. Some of the Dogood letters advocated timely social improvements, such as greater educational opportunities for women and an office of insurance for widows. More commonly, they expressed good-natured criticisms of various human vices, which young Franklin had noticed among the Boston townspeople. "I have a natural inclination to observe and reprove the faults of others, at which I have an excellent faculty," wrote Mrs. Dogood. "I speak this by way of warning to all such whose offenses shall come under my cognizance, for I never intend to wrap my talent in a napkin." The lively widow lashed out against drunkenness, hypocrisy, pride, hoop petticoats. These monstrous topsy-turvy mortal pieces look more like engines of war for bombarding the town than ornaments of the fair sex. And the shallow curriculum at Harvard. They, the students, return as great blockheads as ever, only more proud and self-conceited. But also among the Dogood letters were more serious passages revealing Benjamin's early political convictions. One of these dealt with freedom of speech and the true source of governmental power. Without freedom of thought, there can be no such thing as wisdom, and no such thing as public liberty without freedom of speech, which is the right of every man, as far as by it he does not hurt or control the right of another. And this is the only check it ought to suffer, and the only bounds it ought to know. This sacred privilege is so essential to free governments that the security of property and the freedom of speech always go together. And in those wretched countries where a man cannot call his tongue his own, he can scarce call anything else his own. Whoever would overthrow the liberty of a nation must begin by subduing the freeness of speech. The administration of government is nothing else but the attendance of the trustees of the people upon the interests and affairs of the people, and as it is the part and business of the people for whose sake alone all public matters are, or ought to be, transacted, to see whether they be well or ill transacted, so it is the interest and ought to be the ambition of all honest magistrates to have their deeds openly examined and publicly scanned. Only the wicked governors of men dread what is said of them. Wow. Here, as a 16-year-old boy, Franklin articulated certain fundamental principles of free government more than half a century before they were secured to the American people in the Declaration of Independence and the Bill of Rights. And amazing, because I feel like that is what is exactly happening today, that people are trying to subdue the freeness of speech in order to overthrow the liberty of the nation. What a profound thought right here that Ben Franklin wrote as a 16-year-old. And sorry, that was my own aside, again, which I like to do. Here as a 16-year-old boy, Franklin articulated certain fundamental principles of free government more than half a century before they were secured to the American people in the Declaration of Independence and the Bill of Rights. Elsewhere in the same series of letters, he revealed a deep commitment to individual rights and foreshadowed the long public career which would eventually make him one of the leading participants in the struggle for American independence. I am a mortal enemy to arbitrary government and unlimited power. I am naturally very jealous for the rights and liberties of my country, and the least appearance of an encroachment on those invaluable privileges is apt to make my blood boil exceedingly. I now take up a resolution to do for the future all that lies in my way for the service of my countrymen. Young Ben continued to write under his pseudonym till my small fund of sense for such performances was pretty well exhausted, and then he let his half-brother in on the secret. James was not well pleased with the admiration his friends thereafter expressed for Benjamin's talents, as he thought, probably with reason, that it tended to make me too vain, and perhaps this might be one occasion of the differences that we began to have about this time. Meanwhile, the older Franklin brother began to attract attention of a different kind. The Boston magistrates, taking offense at a political article which appeared in the New England Courant during the summer of 1722, arrested James and placed him in prison for 1 month. The paper continued under Ben's management. Several months later, on the heels of another offensive article, the governor's council strictly forbade the publisher to print or publish the New England Courant or any other pamphlet or paper of the like nature, except it be first supervised by the Secretary of the Providence. The paper's masthead was immediately changed to declare that it was printed and sold by Benjamin Franklin. To avoid government censure, James canceled Ben's old indentures and replaced them with new ones, which were signed in secret and kept private. Benjamin's first editorial preface, printed in February 1723, notified subscribers that the content of the Courant would be altered somewhat. The present undertaking is designed purely for the diversion and merriment of the reader. Pieces of pleasancy and mirth have a secret charm in them to allay the heats and tumors of our spirits, and to make a man forget his restless resentments. They have a strange power to tune the harsh disorders of the soul and reduce us to a serene and placid state of mind. The main design of this weekly paper will be to entertain the town with the most comical and diverting incidents of human life. Although the paper did become more moderate after its scrapes with the colonial authorities, the apprentice-turned-printer still took occasion to give his diversion and merriment a political twist. In one such article, appearing only a week after the Courant was first printed under Benjamin's name, he ridiculed the European titles of nobility and the clerical hierarchies, which were becoming even more objectionable to many Americans. In old times, it was no disrespect for men and women to be called by their own names. Adam was never called Master Adam. We never read of Noah Esquire, Lot Knight and Baronet, nor the Right Honorable Abraham, Viscount Mesopotamia, Baron of Canaan. No, they were plain men, honest country graziers that took care of their families and their flocks. Moses was a great prophet, and Aaron a priest of the Lord, but we never read of the Reverend Moses, nor of the Right Reverend Father in God Aaron, by divine providence Lord Archbishop of Israel. Thou never sawest Madame Rebecca in the Bible, my Lady Rachel, nor Mary, though a princess of the blood after the death of Joseph, called the Princess Dowager of Nazareth. No, plain Rebecca, Rachel, Mary, or the widow Mary, or the like. It was no incivility then to mention their naked names as they were expressed. At the age of 17, Ben Franklin was the youngest full-fledged printer in the American colonies, and already one of the most articulate. He was clearly coming to enjoy the trade his father had chosen for him. And that is the end of chapter 2.